and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd, and we've got another great show for you tonight. Joining me on the panel, we have our experts from Nebraska Extension and Landscape Services. We have Jim Kalish sitting in the insect chair.
Great to be here tonight, my first time in the season.
We have Bill Kreuzer sitting in the Turf and Weeds chair.
Hello, everybody.
We have Kevin Corus, Rots and Spots.
Howdy ho, Kim.
And we also have Jeff Culbertson, and he is going to be answering all of those horticulture questions.
I'm excited to answer all of them.
You know, you can get your questions answered by dialing 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 800-676-5446. We also take your questions or your pictures via email, byf@unl.edu. Please tell us as much information as you can about your question, including where you live, at least in the state. You can follow Backyard Farmer during the week on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and watch our features and our programs on YouTube. So to start, Jim, you've brought us in either a giant badminton birdie or a rocket.
It could be either one. Regardless, it's very interesting.
You are strange.
I wanted to show this. Yeah, it looks a little bit like a bomb, but this is just to let everyone know that I think most of us, not by now, thanks to Backyard Farmer and other sources, know about brown marmorated stink bug. And it's an invasive bug. It's not regulated to try to get rid of or exterminate, but it's so invasive and affects so many crops that we want to be aware of where it is in the state of Nebraska. And so, of course, the Nebraska Department of Agriculture has been putting out these huge traps to collect them if they are around, as you have seen in the Backyard Farmer, at the garden, if you visited it. But there are other kinds of models. I just want to show you the concept of a model, a trap for trapping brown marmorated stink bug. Green represents foliage. They crawl up and they get into this cone and move up to the top. And of course, they don't seem to have the intellect to be able to find their way out. So that's a good thing. And so you can count, or you can at least first detect brown marmorated stink bug with this trap. It has two lures in it that smells like brown marmorated stink bug, and they like to get together. So they have aggregation pheromones. And so you get enough in there, you know, they can party if they want to. But this is what they look like down here below. And they're just a large brownish marbled looking stink bug. And they have these black and white bands along the edge of the body, as you can see toward the posterior part of the body. And then on the antennae, they're broken by little white bands. In other words, the antennae are continuous, but there's little white bands that kind of look like it's broken up. And so that's the key characteristics, those two characteristics, the antennae and the side of the body with those bands, and the fact that it's one of the largest stink bugs that we've ever seen. So. There's going to be some trapping going on this summer. We'll just see where they're at, and everybody keep their eye out on your produce, your vegetable crops, and et cetera, for the presence of these bugs.
Thank you, Jim. All right, Bill.
No sample.
No sample.
But it's probably because it's a continuation of last week. Last week I brought a dandelion. I'm sure we all know what dandelion looks like, but I talked about how it's an indicator of bad management. So I wanted to show a figure from our research that kind of showed the importance of fertilizer. So there's this picture here of a research plot that has been fertilized either 0 times a year, 2 times a year, or 4 times a year to new Kentucky bluegrass lawn with no weed control, no pre's, no posts, nothing. Just fertilizer, good water, and normal mowing. And just look at all the weeds, the dandelions that are growing in that non-fertilized side, and then right next to it, you have proper fertility, university recommendations. There's barely any dandelions in there. And so when you hear my neighbor's got a lot of dandelions, I'm going to get dandelions. Well, it's not exactly true. If you have dandelions, you probably are also doing something wrong. Sure, you could have 1 or 2 that you might want to hand pull or treat. But if you have a lot of dandelions in your yard, that's a bigger sign that maybe you're not fertilizing properly. And so like a new lawn, maybe 10 years old or less, 3 to 4 times a year, return those clippings to put some fertilizer back. If it's an older lawn, 1 to 4 times a year because there's some fertilizer sticks around in that soil after you've maintained an established lawn. So think about how old is your lawn, and then decide, how much fertilizer should we put on to keep those pests at bay.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Kevin, you got dead stuff over there.
I got some pretty sad spruces, Kim, and I've been getting in all spring spruce in various states of Well, death, unfortunately. And now there are fungal diseases out there that attack our spruce. However, this spring I haven't seen any signs of those fungi out there. So far, they've been clean, all of the samples that are coming in. So you'll have fungi that cause needle cast, like this guy here, and so you won't have any needles at all. And then you can have fungi too that attack the vascular system, and then you'll just have bronzing or browning of the needles as well. However, this is also the same symptom of drought stress and or winter injury, which is just drought stress during the winter. And this is what most of the symptoms and most of the diagnoses of the spruce trees have been so far this year. It's just winter injury because of drought stress. So what do we do about it? I think the best option we have is to just try to keep our spruce trees properly irrigated, but try to just water the root system if you can with a soaker hose and avoid getting the foliage wet, because unfortunately those fungi are still probably out there in the environment. And if we create an environment for them, meaning really moist foliage by overhead irrigation, then we could see some of those fungi popping up and causing additional damage to the winter injury. But so far, just winter injury on your spruce trees. So it's been pretty dry. Try to get some supplemental water down with a soaker hose.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, Jeff.
It's so easy sitting down here. You know, all us hort folks that get to sit down here. I don't have to talk about some invasive bug that's going to ruin all our vegetable gardens, or lecture people on what they're doing wrong in their lawns, or how you've mistreated your spruce. I'm just going to talk about a pearl bush. This is Exocorda racemosa. So it's kind of a larger or medium-sized shrub. Mine's about 5 foot tall, about 7 foot across. So it's kind of an irregular shaped shrub. And it's in its glory right now with these nice white flowers. And you can see the new ones just getting ready to open. Give it that, as Kim had lectured me last year on why it's called pearl bush, is the new little flowers are. So
It is a great plant.
pearl bush. So there we can end on a high note.
Pretty.
All right, and then we're going to go back to a low note maybe here, Jim, because you get the first question. This is a viewer from the Omaha area. She thinks she has scale on her mugo pines. She wonders how and when to treat, and she does say they're close to a Japanese maple, so she's given us additional
So it's real
information.
sensitive, in other words, to Japanese maple. Can be sensitive to insecticidal sprays. You're right, that's a pine needle scale. And right now at this time, we're approaching, right now there'll be eggs inside each of those scales that I can see in the image. And as we approach the end of April into early May, when bridal wreath spirea is in full bloom, that's about the time when the little crawlers have hatched out from those eggs underneath the scales. So it's a good time to control them. And I would suggest, because you have the Japanese maple close by, almost looked like it was a little bit entangled there, probably just an insecticidal soap will do. And those are those specially formulated soaps, so they're not real powerful. And that will probably take good care of it. And I'd probably, spray it maybe thoroughly, spray it maybe 3 days, every third day or something like that over a period, a little bit over a week, and when you first see them coming out, and that'll help. Knock the branches and see if you can see the tiny little honey-colored crawlers crawling all over the place, and then go ahead and treat, and then wait a few days, treat again, and a few more days, and treat again, and then I think you'll have them under control. If you don't, late August is another time when the next generation of crawlers emerge.
All right, thank you, Jim. Okay, Bill, so we have people wanting to know about Dutch clover as an alternative lawn and whether it works.
There are definitely other options to having a turf aside from turf grasses. And so something like a clover is going to work well if you have a lawn that's not going to have very much traffic. It's going to be very shady, and you just want a ground cover. And so that's what we have here. This is the courtyard at Keim Hall, showing off the clover lawn that Kim installed. And so it's still a turf, it's still contiguous community. You still mow it, and that's one way we keep the density up, mow it about once a week. And so it can be a really good option. One issue you might have, though, when you have a broadleaf, weed lawn, is controlling other weeds. You can't just go out and spray a blanket, 2,4-D application. You have to be selective. You have to hand pull weeds. And so there's going to be certain issues with it. But, something like a clover lawn can be something that is something to resort to if you have issues with shade tolerance, particularly.
Thanks, Bill. All right, Kevin, last year we had a lot of pears with rust. This viewer has a couple trees in her backyard. And obviously this is a fall picture because she didn't, or a later picture, she didn't have any pictures, but the description was pretty obvious that that's what this is. Leaves are coming in again this year and look good, but she's wondering whether this is going to happen again and is there a treatment for it?
You know, it's possible that this will happen again, and believe it or not, there's actually a pair of diseases that this could be. Okay, so rust is the most likely candidate, but there's also another foliar leaf blight disease that's caused by a fungus called entomosporium leaf spot. And the symptoms are very, very identical. It's very difficult to tell them apart unless you find the spores with a microscope. Regardless, it's hard to say whether or not it'll be back again. It's this year. It's dependent on our environmental conditions. It's typically not worth treating. There are fungicides out there for both of these fungi that are effective, that will work for control. It's a preventative type of application, so now would be the time as those new leaves are emerging on all our pears, our ornamental pears. Propiconazole is a great product that we have, active ingredient that will create great control. However, it typically never causes any dieback on the limbs of the tree. It's more of an eyesore. And so if you're not producing actual pears, if it's just an ornamental pear tree, if you can live with the spots, I would just live with it and forego the treatment. And hopefully, if it's a little bit drier this spring, we won't see it as bad.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Jeff, this is a viewer who lives near Westroads in Omaha.
Okay.
Found a mystery item while putting down new mulch. She's guessing it's a little older than the 1 year, and she didn't see it because it was behind a big woodgelia. She wonders what it is, and is it a keeper?
Well, it could be a keeper. I guess it depends on her. She may want to move it. It's elderberry, which is Sambucus nigra, and so it produces a edible fruit that people, I mean, you hear about elderberry wine and jelly and that sort of thing. So, you know, it can be aggressive. They can tend to spread, and you can end up with kind of a colony of them over time. So you might, if you have an area maybe back in a corner that isn't well managed and you want to put something there that will fill it up, this may be a choice for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Well, in the spring, we all want to get outside and get some things done as soon as we possibly can. Sometimes it's really tough to wait until conditions are right to get plants into the ground. But one thing you can do this time of year is divide those fall-blooming perennials. So Jeff recently got his spade out, headed over to the Yider Garden to show us how to divide asters. Here's Jeff on the business end of his spade.
One of the rites of spring for all us gardeners is checking our perennial beds and seeing what we have coming up. Many times we'll look and notice that maybe a perennial's gotten quite large. There's some dead, typically a dead middle in the plant as it's starting to emerge here in the spring. And that's an indication to us that it may be ready for division. So dividing perennials, what we're looking at in the spring is dividing perennials that typically flower later in the summer, early fall. The fall or the spring blooming perennials we're going to want to divide in the fall, late summer. One of the indications to us that we're ready for division is the first couple inches of growth will tell us just how big the plant is, where we may have some issues. I'm looking at some asters here. We've got some division, some sections that have died out in the plants. And so that's telling me that we are ready to do some dividing here. When we're dividing our perennials, make sure that you lift the plant, you cut it into like fourths. Typically we want to replant about 20 to 25% of the plant. We don't want to plant half or any amount greater than 25% because just in a couple years you're going to be back in redoing the whole thing. So when we lift the plant, we want to make sure that we check out the root system, take out any dead or rotting pieces, clean that up. We want to bring in some compost to refill the hole. We don't want to just kind of put everything back in there. That area will sink and be lower, and then we'll have other issues with fungus and rot and that sort of thing later in the year. So we want to make sure we lift the area back up so that we're planting the new divisions a little high so that it can settle through the summer. So You know, some of the keys are making sure that we have a good piece that we're keeping for the division. If you have several good divisions, scope out other places in your yard or share them with some neighbors. So make sure people are prepared to get some new plants. Bring in compost to backfill around the plant and make sure that we have a good growing situation for the plant, nice fertile soil for them to do well going into the next year.
Not only is this technique a great way to keep those perennials from getting out of control, it's a great way to make friends with the neighbors with a few gifts from your garden, as long as it is something that's not going to take over their landscape. Right. All right, Jim, you get the next question. This is a viewer who says they have what looks like pitch masses on the trunks of their Austrian pines. They're wondering, is this Zimmerman pine moth? And
Yes.
when and how do they treat? Or is it too late?
Actually, the weather has been so iffy up and down that I think we could still get by with doing a treatment right now. What you do is you treat the bark and spray it with an insecticidal spray. It's permethrin or bifenthrin with thorough coverage, and it's the trunk itself as well as where the junctions of the branches meet the trunk, and also wherever you see any of those wounds, because the moths that come out later on in the summer redeposit eggs in those wounded areas. So treatment would be advised in cases like that with what I said, thorough coverage, and then also again you could retreat the next generation somewhere about mid-August if you don't feel like you have adequate control.
All right, thanks, Jim. All right, Bill.
Yep.
The lawns are purple.
They are purple. It's beautiful.
And people are tired of this.
Yeah.
And that's not quite as purple as some, but it's definitely the thing. What is it and what do they do about it?
Yep. We've been getting a lot of calls. I talked to the extension educators this week on the phone, and they're getting a lot of calls too. This is henbit. It's a winter annual, so it germinated last fall and then is completing its life cycle now, going to flower, and it's going to produce a lot of seed. It's a pretty prolific seed producer, and so it will get worse and worse. From a control perspective right now, you just want to keep mowing it. It's going to die soon. It's at the end of its life cycle. And if it's something that's getting really, really bad, then you'd be wanting to do a pre-application early fall. So, early September, late August, that's when this is going to start to germinate again, and that's when that pre would want to go down. So that would be the best way to control it on top of, just good management.
All right, thank you, Bill. Kevin, a bark blasted picture. This is a red maple in the front yard, and it's got that funny twist going on. And you got this one because it looks like a fungus or something is kind of invaded into the trunk itself. You can see a little bit of fungi-looking stuff. They want to know, is there anything they can do in the spring to fix it? This is a Cass County viewer.
It's not looking too good. So that fungus is what I believe is one of the ear fungi, the auricularia. I believe it's hard without actually seeing the fungus in the clinic, but pretty sure that's what it is. Doesn't matter. It's a fungus on your tree on a very good sized trunk, a part of the trunk. I would be very concerned about the structural stability of that tree. That fungus basically serves to, or it uses the inside of the tree, all of that inner wood, as a food source, and so it's been deteriorated. And typically when you see the fruiting bodies of the fungus on the side of the tree, that usually means that there's been a sufficient amount of that wood loss, and the structural stability of the tree is in question. So if there's any structures nearby, house, your nice Ferrari that's parked close to it, and the high winds we have in Nebraska, I'd be concerned about that thing coming down given the amount of decay I see on that big of a trunk. So it might be time to think about a replacement tree rather than a treatment.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And Jeff, you get 2 blasted bark questions.
Okay.
No fungi associated, but one is a royal maple. This is Omaha also, and the other is bark falling off a tree, no location given, but it looked maybe like a pear, I think, on that one. So
Is that a hawthorn?
Is that maybe a hawthorn? Yeah.
Yeah. But
It's a
anyway.
little hard to tell.
Regardless. So the question is, what do we do?
Yeah,
Okay.
other than chainsaw.
Well, I think unfortunately in both cases they look pretty severe, and I'm not sure that kind of like Kevin's saying, that the plant itself is fairly well compromised at this point, and I don't expect it, even if it continues to live, to be much of a tree. It won't certainly thrive. So, and what's causing this is hard to say. There's could be a lot of different causes. We've had a drought in recent year, in the last couple of years, that could have done damage. A lot of this is delayed response to certain things. My guess is these trees, probably last year, if they would have dug around, they would have found that the bark was coming off these trees then, so they're just seeing it a little late. So.
All right, yeah, kind of sad, but it's planting season.
Yeah.
So. Well, this time of year is full of promise and expectations as we get ready for another year in the Backyard Farmer Garden. We showed you some of our preparations in the greenhouse last week, so let's take a minute this week to see what we put into the ground. This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we have a couple of really cool things going on. Our master gardeners have planted 2 giant rows of asparagus. And what you'll notice is big trenches. This is a really interesting plant to establish. You buy it as bare root crowns. They should come moist, and Sarah talked about how you plant bare root plants. Well, these are not woody plants, of course. They are herbaceous. But what you do is you dig a trench and flip the soil to one side, spread the crown out very carefully so you don't break these brittle roots, then just barely cover the crown with soil. And then what happens is the asparagus tips begin to emerge. As they emerge, you can continue to put soil back over the top of the crown until you are back up to level. The fronds then will emerge completely during the first season. We don't harvest any of the asparagus the first year. You can maybe harvest a little bit of it the second year as long as you have pretty strong fronds or spears of asparagus, and then the true harvest starts the third year. So it'll be interesting to watch and see how many of our crowns actually produce good spears this first year, and watch as we flip that soil back into the trenches. That's what's happening this week in the Backyard Farmer Garden. So we are really looking forward to that because I just love asparagus. And our master gardeners did that, so that's great with them as well. All right, Jim, you have a question from a viewer about hostas, holes in the hostas already. They're not up very far, and it looks like the holes are kind of down around the crown of the plant. Any ideas?
My guess is, because it's been so dry and the hostas are still below ground, you're going to have insects that live in the ground or near the ground feeding on that because it's a source of moisture, also nutrition too. So I would suspect some of those pill bugs, millipedes can do that, and then a number of different beetles. And so it's unfortunate, but we need that rain to cause that good growth, luxuriant growth, and get everything well above the ground.
All right, thank you, Jim. All right, Bill, this is a follow-up question. This is a Crete viewer. The weed is henbit. They're wondering about trimac, and then did you say pre-emerge in the fall or broadleaf?
So, I said pre-emergent in the fall first because it's a winter annual. It's going to germinate in the fall and then overwinter, and so that's when the pre-emergent would go down. And then if you do a post-emergence for things like dandelions or creeping Charlie, that's going to have trimac in it in the fall. That's going to kill those really small little henbit plants, and then it's going to prevent it from taking off the following spring. I mean, you could try spraying it now, but I just wouldn't recommend it. It's going to die shortly. Just enjoy the purple while you got it. And if you want to learn a little bit more about it, we have a turf info on our website, turf.unl.edu, fresh off the presses today, with some more information about how to control henbit.
All right, thanks, Bill. Kevin, anthracnose terribly in sycamore last year, or plane tree. Can we expect it again, and is there a treatment?
There really isn't. They actually have fungicides that work to treat it, but again, it's not something I would recommend doing. It's probably not going to be worth the money and the investment unless you have some specimen tree that you really, really want to protect. It's hard to distinguish anthracnose between just common leaf tatter, and I suspect if it stays kind of hot, warmish and dryish and as windy as it's been, we're going to see a lot of leaf tatter as well. So are we going to see it again this year? It's hard to predict. Depends on the weather. We might. I wouldn't worry about putting any kind of a fungicide application on. What I would do is in the fall, when those leaves do fall down to the ground, collect them and remove them from the landscape. If you can burn them or bury them or something like that, that'd be great. And that'll help reduce the amount of the anthracnose fungi that are in the environment and hopefully reduce the amount that you get from year to year. But again, it's just going to be dependent on the environment. It's hard to say if we'll see it again this year. Likely. Kind of a wait and see game. If you really need to treat, there are fungicides out there.
All right, thanks, Kevin.
It's exciting.
Jeff, this is a Beatrice viewer, has heard different opinions about using untreated wood chips. Freshly ground this winter is actually her question, and wonders if this is a good idea.
Yeah, it's fine. There's no problem with that. You know, the thing you want to avoid with any mulch is incorporating it into your soil. So if you're taking mulch and adding it to your garden or adding it to your perennial beds, that's where you can have a situation where you're actually reducing the nutrition of that soil. So you're robbing nitrogen from that soil as it breaks down in there. So that's why if you want to put it on top dress, that's great. It's perfect. Yeah, it'll be just fine.
Excellent, and I have my own chipper, and I just need to get
Yeah,
out
so
there and do it.
Fresh mulch is good.
All right. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. Coming up later on the program, we'll hear from Lauren about cedar apple rust. You can still phone in your questions by dialing 1-800-676-5446. While you're doing that, we are starting the lightning round. Gentlemen, start your engines.
That's ready.
Oh, Jim puts so much pressure on me.
All right, Jeff. Should landscape fabric be used under mulch in landscape beds?
The only place I use landscape fabric is under rock because I don't want the rock incorporated into the soil. Otherwise, I wouldn't use it.
All right. How do you fertilize asparagus to get those big fat spears?
How do you fertilize asparagus? You know, I incorporate compost around my asparagus, and so I try to do that annually.
All right. This person wants to know whether they should use fabric in a raised bed underneath, or should they use coffee grounds and newspaper?
To mulch the plants? Well, they could use ground newspaper. That will work. You have to watch it. It can form a bit of a mat. So, but I don't know if I would use fabric around my garden plants.
All right. What's the best fertilizer for potatoes?
For potatoes, you know, I would use a balanced fertilizer. So, and again, I'll use compost. I use a lot of compost. I don't really fertilize my garden too much. So if I dig my potato trench, then I'll add compost and incorporate that, then plant the potatoes.
All right. Can you use preen on asparagus for weeds?
I'd want to look at the label. Preen is labeled for a lot of flowers and vegetable plants. Again, not crazy about using any kind of pesticide or herbicide on my things I eat.
Excellent. Pretty good. Just
Kevin,
5.
go for
All right,
6.
Kevin, you ready?
6. Oh my gosh. Yes, I'm ready. Laser focused.
Okay, we have a viewer that has fire blight in their cotoneaster. Is there any treatment for that?
Curative, no. Prune out 6 to 12 inches below where you see the symptoms.
All right, and how do you sterilize your pruning tools once you have done that?
There are sterilization liquids out there. I don't know the names of them that work better than some of the things I'm going to suggest, which would be either 75% alcohol, ethyl alcohol, or 10% bleach. But if you do that, you need to soak the pruning shears for 30 seconds, and then you also need to dry your pruning shears because they'll rust. That's a hard question for the lightning round.
It's just hard the way you answered it. The temperatures were in the teens in Valentine. Will that kill the cedar apple rust spores?
Oh, probably not. I don't think they've even come out yet. No.
Okay. What is the disease that causes small dead twigs and cedars?
Cabotina tip blight.
All right. Are the morel mushrooms out yet?
Ooh, haven't been hunting? I don't know. I don't think so.
Too dry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Too dry.
Can a person plant potatoes in the same spot if they had scab on them last year, or do you need to rotate?
Ooh, I would rotate. I think that's a streptomycete that can actually survive in the soil and soil residue. I would rotate.
Okay.
I think that's 6,
I
contrary
think
to
that
what
was
the screen
6.
says.
Really?
Well,
Trying to
the
cheat.
one was 2, and
That was a good recovery, Kevin.
Thanks, Jim.
okay, are you ready, Bill?
I think so.
All right. What is the best turf or mix of turf for dry part shade situation? Is there one?
Dry part shade would be fine fescues, but I still like to use tall fescue because I don't know, I think it's just easier, better adapted for turf.
All right. Is perennial rye an option for general lawn use in this area?
It's an option. It's not a good option. So I recommend going with bluegrass or tall fescue in eastern Nebraska.
All right. How often should new seed be watered?
Depending on the size of the seed, if it's a big seed like like tall fescue, you'd want to maybe water twice a day. If it's a smaller seed like bluegrass, maybe 3-4 times a day, depending on how dry it's been. It's been dry lately, a little bit more frequent. Not very much water though, just more frequent.
All right. Is starter fertilizer important in new seedings, and if so, what's the formulation?
Yeah, we want to look for a starter. Starter is going to have a high middle number for phosphorus because the turfgrass roots have a hard time getting that phosphorus out of the soil. So we want to put down a starter at seeding and then about 6 weeks later.
All right. We have a viewer who aerated. Should they seed and then put down compost? Is that going to work?
They could. Adding compost is always great, and adding some seed there is just going to help if you have any thin areas.
All right. Excellent. Nice
Yeah, I thought
job.
That was a tie there.
Okay. You ready, Jim?
Questions, though.
Yeah.
They were easy.
So we have people who have seen yellow and white butterflies flitting around. What are they, and what is?
Cabbage butterflies and also alfalfa butterflies, so the fuzzy green larvae that they produce.
All right. Ticks are out already. What can people do?
Just make sure that you go out well protected with a repellent and wear clothes up to the hilt, and then check yourself after you come in.
All
and
right.
that will go a long ways.
Okay. How about mosquito control for the lawn if it ever rains again?
I wouldn't think very practical to even attempt to do that. If you have any low areas, definitely level them off, and then I'll take care of mosquito breeding sites.
All right. Bumblebees are flying into a
Yes.
hole in the ground. Is this common?
Yeah, they frequently will use something like a vole hole or something in the ground to establish their little colony down there.
All right. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
convenient. We had a soundless
We had
lightning,
we had like that real distant
lightning with a silencer
with no
on.
thunder. Okay. All right. And on that note, we have Plant of the Week with
Yes.
Gladys.
Gladys this week gave us a couple neat things. The first one is this smaller blue perennial that we have here, Mertanza virginiana bluebells. So like shade, spreads rapidly. Again, does very well this time of year in May, or dies down in May, does very good this time of year. So up till things start to warm up, then it'll die down. So pink buds, and it flowers very early. Then the taller one here, this has been a great year for Mahonia. We've seen it in a couple of places on campus, and it's just really flowering well this year. So this is great poly. So it has blueberries, which is so kind of the fall ornamental. And then it also turns, it's evergreen, so it does have these holly-like leaves, and then they'll turn kind of a burnished red in the fall, and it's very attractive. And they can get quite large. There's a couple different versions. We have some low-growing ones in the Vine Arbor at Maxwell, but there can be quite large ones as well. So
Right. Beautiful combination. Sarah had Mahonia last week that was desiccated in the winter.
Oh.
That can happen a little bit
Right,
with it too. But ours in the courtyard is as tall as I am,
Wow.
practically.
yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you, as always, to Gladys for that beautiful combination. All right, Jim, you get, speaking of bees, bumbleys. Well, this is not bumbleys, but this is a viewer who said she had dead bees showing up in her bird bath. And she said they're about 5/8 inches long, between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch wide, tan with darker brown stripes and some dark on the
So it
posterior.
does sound like the honeybees. And so the honeybees, actually, when it starts to get warm especially, honeybees need to find water sources to take back to their colonies to cool the colony, much like a heat pump. But so they're out looking for sources. Now, when I looked at the bird bath there, it had rather a sharp angle to contain the water, and they need to have real shallow water or something to the point of wetness for them to lap up the moisture. So, if you want to use the bird feeder, put perhaps some twigs or pine cones in there to give the bees surface area, so that they can just have this. Lap up just a thin layer of water rather than get the full dunk treatment where they drown. So and then also if you want to provide alternatives for honeybees to gather moisture, because when it is hot, like I say, they really need it. And so the alternatives will help too, which could be just anything, just like a pool or something really shallow that might even dry out by afternoon, but at least you're providing them with a safe source of water.
All right, thank you, Jim. Okay, Bill, a goosegrass question. How do you get rid of it?
Yeah, goosegrass. So this is a.
Oops, got the wrong picture up there. Sorry, that's my fault. I had them out of order.
Okay.
So this is the one that is this a piece of plywood or is this landscape fabric? They've lived there 14 years.
Yeah.
And they want to know how deep to dig on this one.
You know, we see this a lot, and it's nothing to do with anything like plywood or landscape fabric or anything. It just could be a different cultivar of grass. Some of them take longer to green up than others, and so if in the season they look about the same and it's just a green up thing in the spring, it's probably just a different cultivar, and I wouldn't think there's some kind of root impediment. If you are thinking that's what it is, you probably only got to dig a couple inches to figure out if there's something there. I mean, it's not going to be 3 feet deep to see that kind of response.
All right, thank you, Bill. Kevin, this is a Norfolk viewer. It's a dwarf cherry in Norfolk, and there's a hole at the base of the cherry tree, which is why you got it. What do you
Par
think?
for the course for those kinds of trees, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
These kinds of, I guess I'd call them an annual canker. They form a lot on these cherry. You said cherry, right? Yeah, cherry trees.
Yep.
All over the trunk, and what it actually is it looks like slime flux or bacterial wetwood, where it's this continual. It's almost like an open sore. The tree never calluses off, and it can kind of be wet. And there's not a thing you can do about it. Preventative-wise, you just want to make sure you're not injuring the tree. Usually those things are the result of some type of physical injury to the trunk of the tree that exposes that tree, and then you get a resultant infection either with a bacterium or fungi or something like that. So you just want to leave it exposed to the sun and the wind, and hopefully those elements will help kind of battle those pathogens, and the tree will survive. It may not thrive, but I think it'll survive for several years regardless of that canker. So there's not a whole lot you can do.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Blasting bark. Again, your pictures this time are pears.
Okay.
And it's a Columbus viewer and a Chaco Hills viewer in Omaha. So both of them, what's the deal going on with the blasting bark?
You know,
Ornamental pear.
like I said before, and we've all talked about, could be a variety of environmental conditions. Pears in particular are prone to included bark, so it could be that bark creating some problems with pathogens or something, and then the bark sloughing off like that. So, you know, again, with in those conditions, the bigger tree, it looks like it's attacking the main part of the trunk. That other one had a branch there. I'd go ahead and remove the branch. But, you know, one of the issues that this is, again, an opportunity to look at a different sort of tree for your yard. There's a lot of great choices. We're starting to see some invasive issues with our ornamental pears in some of the less managed areas. I have some parks near us here in Lincoln, and we're starting to see pears starting to move into areas that they try to maintain more for wildlife or hiking or something, and they're starting to move in. So I think there's a lot of great choices out there. Maybe pears are sliding to the back door here.
Exactly. They stink when they bloom, too.
Okay.
All right, we're going to do a round of questions here, Jim. This is about cabbage moths. We don't know where they're from, but they are eating all his plants. What would that be? Cabbage moths?
Transplants?
It says
If they're
cabbage.
tiny little holes, they're actually one of the first ones to emerge for like cabbage seedlings or plants would be, and sometimes they do come actually from the nursery, are little cabbage weevils. And they cause tiny little holes at first, and then they drop down to the base of the plant, you know, in that soil medium there. So if you want to try to control them or something, it would take a little bit of dusting of carbaryl. I don't think the cabbage worms are out yet. They will be later, and those will be fuzzy and green. If they're there and you see them, just, you know, give them a little smudge between the index finger and the thumb, and that'll take care of them.
All righty then. Bill, this is another Trimec question.
Sure.
They want to get rid of the weeds under their staghorn sumac, which is,
Sure.
you know, a thin grower. So will that work without damaging the sumac, or is there a different recommendation?
I'd be a little bit careful, especially with the weather we've had being dry and windy and low dew points. There's a lot of volatilization risk, and so especially like with an ester, you want to avoid them from a spray perspective. And so if it's something that you can try to control manually, mechanically, I would try to do that instead of spraying under something you care about.
All right, thank you. This is a Deschler viewer, Kevin. Yellow fungus on the vegetables, outer leaves of the cole crops, yellowing. It's a fungus. Recommended Extension Office recommended removing the affected leaves.
What was the host plant?
Cabbage in the garden, cabbage and cole crops, so like kales and things.
It's a yellow fungus.
I think it's a scald.
I don't believe that it would be a fungus, to be honest with you. I don't know of any yellow fungus that attacks cabbage that would really be bright and yellow. The yellow coloring is probably the cabbage itself in a response to something else. That's a difficult one. I would maybe recommend sending in a sample if he does believe it is a fungus, and then we could develop a management recommendation based on that. But from what I know of cabbage diseases, there's nothing that would be on the leaves super bright and yellow. Maybe a picture too would help.
Picture would be excellent on this one, thanks. Jeff, this is a question about, is it too late to prune evergreens? They're not saying which ones.
Okay. At this stage, no, it's not too late to prune some evergreens. If you have to do some minor pruning, I would say go out and do a little bit of pruning. If you're really hacking away at stuff, I think we're getting a little late in the year for that. So.
All right, and it would be nice to know which kind of evergreens.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this time of year, homeowners might be seeing what looks like orange alien blobs taking over their cedars. They might seem like they come from outer space, but they don't come in peace. Cedar apple rust can be a serious problem for those who have apples and crabapple trees, and luckily Lauren is here to make the aliens go back to where they came from.
Cedar apple rust can be a fairly devastating disease, and we're going to spend a little time talking about its life cycle and how you can better manage it in your landscape. Particularly with cedar apple rust, we'll see the galls that are most obvious on the juniper trees this time of year. On any of the cedars, this happens to be a Taylor juniper that we're looking at, which is quite susceptible, but any of the cedar species pretty much will see the cedar apple rust at that stage. Now, this fungus has a very unique life cycle in that it starts out on the cedar tree. At this point, these galls start, and as moisture occurs and it warms up in the spring, those galls will develop these large teleal horns that are large masses that you'll see on the cedar trees, and those release the spores that will then go over and infect our apple trees in the landscape. So particularly if you have both cedars and apples, that's where you'll be really prone to have a lot of cedar apple rust. And this can be really a proximity issue and also wind direction. So if you have cedar species that are in close proximity to apples, and particularly upwind of predominant winds in the spring, then you're going to tend to see more galling and infection on those cedars. Now, as those spores go over and affect the apple, on the apple tree itself, that's a time where we can really manage this easier, because there are many fungicides available that you can use to protect that apple tree from infection from the cedars. So here, as we see those galls start to emerge, and we see those teleal horns form, that's an indicator to you that it's time to start your protection on that apple tree, and even actually a little bit before that if you can. So as our apple trees are starting to flower, we're starting to get those leaves starting to emerge, and we see those galls on that cedar, that's when it's time to use that fungicide. Now, there are definitely other diseases that if you're using a good fruit tree spray program, you're going to manage as well, because by now you've already maybe put that application on for scab, which many of our apple species are susceptible to. So if you've got your apple leaves protected though, you're going to do a lot for management. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can, if you just have a few galls, remove those cedar apple rust galls. That's going to remove that inoculum source, and this is one of the only diseases in our landscape that you can really see it very evident where it's coming from, so you can remove that and reduce that inoculum. And then when it goes over to the apple, you make your fungicide applications. And then the other thing that you can do is you can watch that apple tree itself, and as those places of infection continue to develop, and on the underside of the leaf you'll see those spores release and those points where they become rough. As that comes a little bit later in the season, then at that window you could actually use some fungicides to protect the cedar tree itself. So this is a neat fungal disease that occurs in our landscapes. It's quite common. It can be really devastating, but if you know the cycle that you're working with, you could easily manage cedar apple rust.
You know, the first step in avoiding cedar apple rust is to select resistant varieties of apple trees. But for the established ones, you probably will have to put them on a fungicide schedule and stick to it in the spring. And the resistance of varieties does vary across the state because of the weather conditions. So check locally on apples. All right, Jim, asparagus, Douglas, Nebraska area, and she thinks asparagus beetle is attacking. 30 feet of asparagus spears come up white. They don't mature much. The heads get all fuzzy and the stems dry out. She's been using garlic spray on the spears, but it's still not working. Is this asparagus beetle or something different?
You know, I was thinking perhaps not. I see some little bit of notching there, which might be from the beetles. And if you have a history of the beetles, obviously it means that you would have to be doing some treatment very quickly after those spears are out to prevent eggs being deposited on them. But I was questioning as to whether there might be the sulfur compounds or whatever in the garlic spray, and perhaps the garlic has maybe an oil carrier to it, and I don't know if that would be very healthy for such tender spears. You can check your label on the garlic that you're using, that spray that you're using. The other one, it almost looks like there's been episodes of freezing or something like frost going on or something like that.
We've had some cold nights, so.
Right, so that could have done it to it. All right, not really helpful, but no beetles.
No beetles yet.
Okay, so now I think we have goosegrass.
Okay.
Since I messed up last time. And it is how to get rid of it.
Okay,
Bill.
so we're not really sure if this viewer has actually seen goosegrass or not. Normally it's a grass, it's not going to germinate. It's a summer annual like crabgrass or foxtail, and it's not going to germinate until very early or later, like early June, late May. And so if we're trying to control, if we have a real history of goosegrass, our pre-emergent is going to be the most important thing we can do from a chemical option because it's hard to control post-emergent. And so that application is going to, again, want to go down, mid to late May. And so if you're already on a pre-emergent application for crabgrass, you do your first one about now, and then if you do a sequential app, that would also help, prevent that goosegrass from germinating. Mow high too. It seems like if you mow a little bit higher, you can really help to keep that weed under control. But if you already have existing issues with goosegrass and year to year, you're gonna need to get on a pre to really keep it under control, keep it from spreading.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, Kevin, measuring the candles on the pines, we have an Omaha forester who does this, and they've broken dormancy already, and he's saying it's time to treat for the pine diseases. So.
Yeah, he may have a different scale than I use, but I always heard that as soon as they those new candles start to emerge is when the treatments need to start going down. I guess that's basically what he said. So yeah, what we're trying to protect against here is a Diplodia tip blight, and it's a fungal needle blight disease that only affects those newly emerging candles. So there are products out there. I don't have them on the top of my head. Can consult your local tree care professional. They'll know what the latest and greatest is. But they do provide a very nice level of preventative control. So if you do have tip blight a lot on your probably Ponderosa or Austrian pines, then yeah, now is the time to treat.
All right, and I know we've had some YouTube video on this if people go to our YouTube website. So, all right, Jeff, this is a person who had a spring snow crabapple hit with strong winds, fuller growth on one side, and then it started to lean in the soaking rain. The tree is moving a lot. They're wondering if they should prune one side off to take the weight off, or what can they do to save this tree? That's a pretty big trunk to be wiggling.
That's a big trunk, and the tree looks like it's doing pretty well. If that's a recent picture, then it looks like, right now the entire tree looks, looks like it's going to leaf out. It's flowering throughout the entire tree. My guess is with the soaking rains and wind, there probably were some root issues, which is not uncommon with a lot of our landscape trees. One side may have been better rooted than the other, broke things loose. A couple ideas. One, I would suggest staking the tree. I've had good luck with that with some trees that we've had some root issues. They've gotten loose. I went ahead and staked them. You're going to have to get some heavy-duty T-posts. You're going to want to use some nylon webbing and kind of secure that tree pretty well for about a year or so. and it may be longer till we get some good root growth. But continuing to allow the wind and the rain bat it around, we're just going to continue to do damage.
Is it dangerous to try to winch the tree back into position or anything?
You know, I don't know if I would winch it. I mean, if it's loose, you know, you can wet things down and see if you want to get it a little, a little straighter if you can. But I don't know if I would winch it down.
All right, thanks. Well, we have some announcements of fun things going on in the gardening world, and the first one is creating herb and succulent containers and concrete leaves, the master gardeners of Douglas Sarpy, this coming Saturday at the Extension office. Our second announcement is Pollinate Lincoln at Finke Gardens with Dr. Doug Golick this Saturday at 10 o'clock at Finke Gardens with a number on the screen. And the third one is 30th Annual Spring Affairs coming up, Lancaster Event Center, next Saturday, April 23rd, 9 to 2, and again, a number on the screens. So fun gardening stuff.
Yeah.
All right, time for just a handful of questions, gentlemen. An Omaha viewer says they have grubs all over, and somebody is at a store is saying there is only one product left, and it's sort of a laxative that slows down the grubs.
Okay.
And I think this one, yeah.
If it's applied, it's in the turf grass. If there are grubs all over, maybe there's some digging going on. They don't really feed substantially. And assuming we're going to get regular spring rains, the growth and the root development of the turf keeps well ahead of the damage that those grubs are doing as they're starting to pupate and go into their quiescent stage. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I wouldn't be treating right now for grubs.
Yeah.
Yeah, all righty. Bill, this is a Milligan viewer.
Okay.
And they're saying a PO4 over 200. That's what this is reading like.
Yep.
And nothing will grow. And what can he do? So describe what their
So
question is
their
here.
question is they're asking about having a hard time getting their grass to become established, and they soil tested, and for phosphorus is an important nutrient for seeding, and so their soil test value was at 200 part per million phosphate, P2O4. And there's probably a lot of reasons aside from the phosphorus of why your seed wouldn't grow, and so it's really difficult. All you've told me is that you probably have enough phosphorus, but it's an irrigation issue. Is it a seed issue? Is it old seed? Is it a poor soil? There's a lot of other things going on. It was pre-applied, and now you're trying to seed into it. So there's a lot of potential reasons why it couldn't be growing, but the phosphorus isn't one of them. So I wouldn't worry about putting on a starter in that situation.
All right, thank you, Bill. Kevin, I'm going to bounce this to you, and it might go to Jeff. This is an Imperial. They have fruit trees, 10-year-old cherries and plums, dead this year. They got hit by the freeze last year, but seemed to recover. And they've got some apple trees that also lost branches. Are they seeing the results of weather, of age, of fire blight, or various prunus malus diseases? Any notion on that, or is it just because it's fruit trees and Imperial? And would a picture be good?
A picture would be great. With the malice, with the apple trees, we did see a lot of fire blight last year, and a lot of stem twig dieback. It is considerable across the state, so that could be a good reason why you lost some of your apple limbs. In terms of the cherries, though, I'm not certain what we would have here in the state in terms of a disease that would cause sufficient, substantial limb dieback like that.
Yeah, but the prunus fruit trees are really susceptible to
Right,
weather,
right.
so they're tough to grow sometimes. So, and at 10 years, they're just getting into their bearing years, really. So,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Death does not become them.
right.
All right, Jeff, about the last question. This is also a Beatrice viewer. They had a Scotch pine die, and they want either a white pine or a ponderosa in about the same spot. Any precautionary words on either of those two evergreens?
The white pine may be a better choice than a ponderosa, just because of some of the needle diseases that we've talked about here. Although I will say, if there's not a lot of other pines in the vicinity, it may not be a big issue. We have Australian and ponderosa on campus. I don't spray them intentionally, just to see how they continue to do. We do sanitation, and we really don't have a lot of issues with needle diseases. Certainly not to the point that we're removing trees all the time. So,
All right,
so I think if it's sited right, they could use either tree.
either one of those,
Yeah.
depending on the quality that they want, the character, because
Right.
those are pretty different trees when
Yeah.
it comes down to using them in the landscape. One's native, one has the word Eastern attached
right,
to it.
yeah.
And I guess Beatrice is Eastern
Yeah,
Nebraska.